Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Mike Kollin at crackedfemalecode.com. Alright, so let's get started. So today's video is going to be about something that can destroy your marriage, and understanding this will help you or show you how to save your marriage or how to save your relationship. Now, if you're a single guy, this is very important because this starts early on when you meet a girl. These are things that we do unconsciously that we're not even aware of. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, so there's something called different names by different professions or psychologies. So if you went to college and you studied even, I believe, Psychology 101, you would have learned about stimulus response, Pavlov and the dog. And the thing about it is Pavlov actually was not the person who discovered stimulus response. He was just the person that made it famous. It was Mr. or Dr. Twitmeyer. Yeah, let me look it up real quick. Hold on. Alright, so here it is. Alright, so it's Edwin B. Twitmeyer. He was 1873 to 1943. He was a professor of psychology and director of the psychological laboratory and clinic at the University of Pennsylvania. That university has written a lot of books on human behavior, relationships, psychology, etc., etc. So it says he's a little-known figure in the history of psychology, but if you're an NLP person, you will know about this guy because we do something that we call anchors, which comes from stimulus response, which is what Dr. Pavlov made famous, okay? So basically what happened with Twitmeyer is he discovered that you could do an auditory stimulus to create a reaction from someone, okay? But what happened is the psychology board, I believe it was the American Psychology Board, listened to him, they yawned and said, oh, whatever, man. But there was a Russian professor, Dr. Pavlov, who made it very famous, and over there they said, no shit. So it was the famous, this famous study where they have the dog that was starving hungry, and they put him in a room, and they had like a little tube on the side of his face from his salivation gland, and they would show him food like steak or whatever, and the dog would start to salivate, and while it was in this peak state, they would ring the bell, and they kept doing this. I don't remember if it was 10 times or 12 times. The funny thing is, depending on what psychology book you read, they always say a different amount of time. So whether it was 6 times, 8 or 12, it doesn't matter. What ended up happening was the bell got connected to the salivation gland's stimulus response, and so next thing you know, they brought the dog in the room. He wasn't hungry. They had just fed him a little bit earlier in the day, and they rang the bell, and all of a sudden the dog starts to salivate, and it starts to drip out of this little tube that they got embedded into the salivation gland, which starts to drip. And even the dog had this look of confusion of like, why am I hungry? Because I just ate, and why am I salivating? Because I'm not hungry. Now that's how powerful stimulus response is. Now I'm going to start calling it anchors because in NLP and hypnosis, that's what we call. We call it anchors. And essentially this is what hypnotherapists, especially stage hypnotherapists, do to you. They anchor you to sleep or to confidence or bark like a chicken or whatever. And then when they fire that anchor off, boom, you start doing, being the Elvis impression or whatever. Now these can be used for very positive things, but sometimes we connect them to very negative things which can destroy a marriage. And if you're a single guy and you have a fear of approaching women, talking to women, carrying on conversation, and or leading a woman romantically into the bedroom, you probably, and I would say absolutely, have a negative anchor, which we now will call a phobia, connected. So it becomes neurologically connected, just like if I push J on the keyboard here, J is going to come up, right? So something will trigger it. It could be the look in a woman's eye, it could be a certain tone, it could be just the look of a female in general can trigger an absolute fear state in most men that are single. In fact, the reason why you're single is because you're afraid to approach women. And this is a negative anchor or negative stimulus and response. Alright, so I've got a bunch of videos of me hypnotizing and anchoring people to laughter, to like right here. I'm going to put a video clip where Adam was having a problem. He had a huge fear of approaching women, and all I had to do was anchor it to something that put him in a very positive state, something that made him kind of aggressive, like would go after it with a very confident, positive feeling. And I'm going to tell you what it was. So I never said it in the video, but I'm going to tell you what it was. Adam, out of the blue, because I just asked, so I snapped him out of it and changed the subject to get him out of the state of mind. So what's something that you really, really enjoy doing? That's just something that's natural and it's comfortable, but you really like doing it. It's like just really, and out of the blue, he goes, honestly, he goes, hamburgers. He goes, I love a delicious hamburger. And as he was doing it, I start anchoring that in. I go, well, tell me, like what do you feel? Do you feel it inside? He goes, oh, it's this feeling in my stomach and my solar plexus. It's a warm, comforting feeling, and it like drives me to want to go get it. And I anchored that in. Now watch what happens. Okay, so in this clip, I actually don't have the one where he approaches the woman. I can't seem to find it in my iMovie thing here where I edit my videos. So, but I did it. I just uploaded it about probably a week ago before this, maybe a little bit more. Just look up clients' testimonials, and it'll be Adam. So he approaches a woman in that. So I linked up stimulus response / what we call anchors. And the minute he saw this woman that he was attracted to, and that was the trigger, was boom, he just walked away right in the middle of us talking. And he went up and started the conversation with her for about 10 minutes, got her number, and came back. Now watch this. This is where I have Adam hypnotized. Technically, it's called an anchor or stimulus response to a pen that I'm clicking. You can barely hear it, but also to the wooden table. Watch this. White from England, London. All right, so far, we're about 2/3 through the course. What do you think about it?
It's awesome, man. Which I think is revolutionary.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say? Oh yeah. By the way, I wanted to ask you something. Do you like this wood?
I do. It's good wood, man.
Take a look at the wood. but you're not hypnotized, are you?
You may have triggered a few staves.
Well, let's look at the wood. Is there anything special about the wood? I have a pen, and watch what happens when I click it.
Oh, dear.
And I want to make sure that you don't look at the wood. I don't want you to imagine the first time you looked at the wood and started laughing now. No, I do not hypnotize people. I put them in. So let me ask you a question. Would you say you've been happier than you've been in a long time?
I felt some pretty high states, man. I'm crying, dude.
Now do you see why I love my job?
Yeah. They probably think I'm on some kind of medication, but no, I'm not.
All right. Well, this is Adam White, and he's from Great Britain. Is there anything you want to say? Anything at all? Anything at all?
Hey, it's been awesome, dude, and I can't wait to go back to London and see what I can do with this stuff.
Yes. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So to this day, I can click that pen. I can even do it through Zoom or over the phone and make him laugh, or even just mention, "Hey, remember that wooden table at that restaurant or at that hotel?" He'll just start laughing uncontrollably. So let's talk about how this affects you in relationships and how this can absolutely destroy your loving relationship and or your marriage. So the whole reason I got into during learning neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, psychology, therapy was because at a very young age, I watched my parents just fight like cats and dogs, and my dad loved my mom with all his heart and all his soul. Unfortunately, there was a lot of negative anchors that were set that they were not aware of back then. And most psychologists right now would probably listen to this and go, what's an anchor? What's he talking about? Well, they know what stimulus response is. But here, okay, let me add this. So here's the difference, okay. So basically psychology said, okay, cool, we're going to publish this and make this, part of our teaching, right? Stimulus response. But then they stopped. That's all they did. All they studied it was like, okay, so people can have negative stimulus responses, which we now call triggers, because most people are like, oh, you're triggered. It's a negative state. It's not a positive one. Here's what NLP did. Number one, they discovered you can set this up through visual anchors or stimulus response, auditory anchors, something you hear, and you can also do it through kinesthetic, which is through touch. You can even do it through words. Now, the other thing NLP did is they said, and this is just one question, how can we use this in a positive way? So psychology essentially has studied negativity, sickness, illness, mental illness, depression, schizophrenia, and all this negative shit. And they got really good at installing depression and schizophrenia and all that shit into people because that's what they've mastered. They're really good at that. There was a study that, not a study, but many studies that were done. Now this is back in the 90s when I first heard this, is that 80% of the people that see a therapist, they don't get better. 10% get better, but they don't know why. And then the other 10% get worse. So what NLP did is, number one, we figured out we could use it in all of our senses and all of our 5 modalities. Number two, they said, how can we use this in a positive way? Well, you can install positive anchors or positive stimulus response. And then we discovered you can actually re-anchor a negative anchor or a negative trigger, which fires off a negative anchor, negative stimulus response, and you can reconnect that to something very, very empowering, confident, calming, or very loving and positive, like we did with Adam. That's all I did. I just took his trigger and I relinked that up to another anchor that actually set off his hunger drive is what it was, okay? And then for the laughter, obviously that was a separate anchor, which we anchored him to laughter. All right, so now watch this. So here's what happens. You get into a marriage, and let's say your wife has a bad day at work and she's coming home in a negative emotional state of mind. She comes home, walks in the door, and she sees your face and she hears you go, "Hi, honey." Boom, that gets linked in, that gets anchored in. Not only the "Hi, honey," but seeing your eyes or seeing something specific about your face, boom, that gets anchored in to a not a positive state, okay? So essentially what happened was, what got linked up was your voice. So hearing your voice, hearing the phrase "Hi, honey," and then seeing your face or that certain facial expression you had, which was a very positive expression, which should elicit a positive response. But it doesn't, because in that moment she linked up not positivity. Now I'm trying to keep it real positive because I want to make sure you guys keep connecting positive links and anchors to me too, okay? For a better learning experience. So then what happens, she comes home one day and she puts her hand on the door handle and she hears your voice. Boom, now the door handle got linked up, right? So once you triggered in that state of mind, the next day or maybe a week later, and then it was the kitchen sink, and then it was the kitchen handle, or the sink handle, the hot or cold. And all of a sudden, all these anchors are set around the house, and all of a sudden, like she's just like in an unbelievably negative, maybe sad or depressed state. Now I'm going to give you a real life example to explain this or teach it to you better. But first, here's what I want to say. Here's what's going to happen. All of a sudden, all the positive anchors that you had from when you first met, from your wedding, from all the stuff that were set throughout the house, all of a sudden they all get set to negative stuff. I mean, you may even hear your wife say, "I can't stand that picture," and you're like, "I thought you loved that picture. You're the one who begged me to buy it for you." You know, and stuff like that, or they picked out a couch, or they picked out, now they're like, they just want to get rid of it, and they're like, "I don't know, I just don't like it," because it's triggering a real negative state of mind or emotional state throughout her body. Now watch this. All right, so this was probably the 3rd or 4th year that I was doing neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis, therapy, etc., and actually in my first professional practice before I moved where I live now. So what happened was, a friend of the family had came over and had asked me, said, "I heard you're doing this new stuff that you can help people with." I'm like, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "Well, my girlfriend is super, super depressed. Like, she's suicidally depressed. She's on medication. She's on this. She's on that." I'm like, "Well, has she actually tried therapy? Because medication isn't going to get rid of the problem. It's just going to numb it, so to speak. And even then, it just puts you in a more depressed state." And he goes, "She's been to all kinds of psychologists and therapists, and nothing's working." If you listen to one story, listen to this one. Now, there's going to be another one at the end of this. So it's a real positive one. But you don't have to listen to that one. It'll help you understand anchoring better. But listen to this story right now. So what ended up happening was, I sat down with her and I talked to her for a while. And I had realized, like, oh, she's got a bunch of negative anchors sitting here. Like, okay. Because Robbie was like, "Mike, when I first met her, she was this really happy person. I don't know what's going on." So they were young. She still lived at her mom and dad's house, and so did Robbie, by the way. Or actually, it was just her mom. Her dad had passed away, I think, or they got divorced, I don't remember. But the dad wasn't there. And so what ended up happening was I could snap her out of it and get her into a real positive state, because my office was a new environment, so we could set all kinds of positive anchors. And so I was kind of just going, well, what is it that's triggering her? Like, what is it? Now, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole, but there's a series of questions that I can ask, and there's some other things that I'm looking for that will find it. So, boom, I found the main anchor, and what it was her mom. So what ended, and you know what, actually, her dad might have actually died, because I think that's what this anchor was. Someone had died, I believe it was her dad, and she was really close to whoever this person was. I remember that part. And what happened was, her mom came up to her and obviously would hug her at the funeral and hug her at all the family gatherings, and would call her name out, Stephanie, that was her name. And what ended up happening was all of this got anchored. And then all of this got anchored at home. Now, here's what happened. So I was trying to find out, like, what is the main anchor? And it turned out it was her mom going, Stephanie, just calling her, like, get out of bed or come down for breakfast. And so it was Stephanie, and it was just like that. And I said, kind of replicate your mom's voice till you can really do it. And I could tell, because when she replicated it perfectly, she went into this real deep depression. So then I snapped her out of it and said, hey, look up over there, look at this. And I fired off a happy anchor, and she started smiling again. And then I went, Stephanie. And that's not quite it, but I almost got it. It's like, Stephanie. And whatever it was, I copied it, and then boom, she went right back in. It's like, boom. I was like, cool, I got it. So then what I did, I broke her state again, and I got her into a positive state. And then what I would do was I would fire off that anchor, but then I fired off some positive anchors. Okay, I'm not going to break down the details. So essentially what ended up happening was I fired off these, what we call stacked positive anchors, towards like 10 or more stacked, to where that will overwhelm the negative anchor. So now the negative anchor collapses into the positive ones. So all of a sudden she's laughing her ass off, and all I had to do is like, hey, you want some water, and change the subject. So what's going on with you and Robbie? Oh, well, but I'm Stephanie. And she starts laughing and laughing and laughing. So then what I did is I spent some time, quite a bit of time actually, going through her house, so that the front doorknob actually triggered it, the doorbell, one of the couches in the living room, and then it was her bedroom door handle, and then it was the light switch in her bedroom, and the kitchen light switch, and then there was a chandelier downstairs. So then what I did, I just started anchoring up to all this stuff, and then I said, hey, look at your mom's face when she says that your name. I go, what do you see? She goes, it's her eyes. I go, now imagine her saying stuff. And I didn't say it. I go, just imagine her calling your voice out in that specific way. And she starts cracking up. And all of a sudden, the mom's eyes are linked up, making her laugh. The mom's, I think it was her nose and her eyebrows, boom, were just triggering her. And so then, now watch this. This is a really cool thing. So she goes home. And the minute she gets to her front door and looks at the door handle and the doorbell, she starts laughing her ass off. So she walks in the door laughing her ass off hysterically, because remember, we stacked this laugh anchor all the way up. And all this stuff is pushing that, triggering that positive laugh anchors. And her mom walks up and goes, well, what's going on? And Stephanie, now how I know, because Stephanie came back a couple days later, and she's like, oh my God, I can't stop laughing. And so what happened was she saw her mom's eyes, her eyebrows, and her nose, and all of those started triggering those anchors that were stacked up, and she's laughing and laughing. Now what happens to the mom? When someone is laughing hysterically and it's overpowering, the mom collapses into it. So now Stephanie's face, Stephanie's eyes, Stephanie's voice, and Stephanie's laughter all get anchored into the mom in a very positive way. So now the mom might look above the door, at the door handle, pulling her in, closing the door, touching the door handle, and all of a sudden all these things, like they went and sat down on the living room couch at first, that became a positive anchor. Looking out the living room window, that became a positive anchor. Looking at seeing the tree outside just to the right of the living room window, that became an anchor. And all of a sudden all these things are anchoring, laughter. They go into the kitchen. And here's what ended up happening. The mom ended up calling me and saying, I cannot thank you enough for what you have done for my daughter. I was so worried about her, because she had actually attempted suicide before. And she goes, Michael, we cannot stop laughing at each other. She goes, it is hysterical when I go upstairs, when I get on the stairs, when I go down the stairs. She goes, everything makes me laugh now. And that's a lot better than suicide. So we turned everything around, and all of a sudden, even arguments. Here, now watch the deviousness of this. This is incredible. Even when they would start an argument, the argument suddenly they might look out the living room window or sit on the living room couch or touch the door handle or flip the light switch or look at the chandelier or look at some of the things that were anchored in the kitchen, and all of a sudden their arguments begin to anchor and stimulate laughter, uncontrollable laughter. So now all of a sudden arguing and fighting becomes this, it gets like a pattern interrupt, and they explode into laughter. Remember when your marriage or your relationship or that girl you used to be in love with in high school or college, remember when you guys literally couldn't stop laughing over the stupidest, silliest things? You can have that back, but you have to learn about anchors, and I can reset the anchors for you and your spouse or your former spouse. So get your butts in here, take my course, Crack the Female Code. This is where we start, and one of the main core pieces, there's 3 core pieces we do, is we create emotional states for women that are unbelievably warm, loving, sensual, something women call emotional fulfillment, which is the #1 emotional feeling in a woman's life, in her world. We create all of those things, and guess what happens? She links them up to you, because guess what? There's no other guy on the planet other than the men that have taken my course that know how to do this. And I don't mean the anchors, I mean the emotionally fulfilling way of talking to a woman and creating those emotional states for her. There's a lot more than that, but I'm going to leave it at that. And the second story I'm not going to bring up because this is just way too long. So alright guys, God bless you guys. I'll see you in the next video. And remember, this is how you save your marriage, and this is how you save your relationship. Alright, see you soon. Remember, click subscribe, click that like button, and go ahead and buy my book, Crack the Female Code, at crackthefemalecode.com, or buy the ultimate package, which has the Crack the Female Code in it. It also has sex signals, which is how it lets you know how a woman is attracted to you and wants you to approach her and talk to her and have sex. I also have how to get the girl and keep the girl. That's a longer book, about 160 pages, and much more. Crack the Female Code is 500 pages, by the way. It's over 500. All right, guys. See you in the next video. Peace.